7 minutes until showtime. 6 minutes until showtime. 5 minutes until showtime. 4 minutes until showtime. 3 minutes until showtime. 5 1 minute until showtime. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening,
Blog
everyone.
Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Trucking with Authority, December 19th, 2017, and I am extremely happy today. Extremely happy. Because I can see I have callers on Blog Talk. I have viewers on both Facebook and on YouTube, which means there are still some of you that survived the apocalypse. There are still some of you out there, and I'm not alone. I'm excited to know that the world didn't end, and I'll tell you what, the last 72 hours has been extremely interesting. So much has been going on. It has been a wild ride. The past 2 years has culminated in what has been just 72-hour blitz of craziness. I think we're on the downhill side of that. There's still a few glitches that some of these companies are working out.
Facebook's good. Blog Talk, there's nothing.
Okay. So there are still a few glitches that we are working out on a few of these different avenues. All of the ELD manufacturers are up and running, going strong. This has been what they've been waiting for the past couple of years, ever since the U.S. government told the FMCSA to mandate every truck on the road to have an ELD, with the exception of just a few that might fall into some of the loopholes. I've been telling people for the past 2 years, you better be ready for this. Not many people took my advice. A lot of people waited until that very, very last minute. And everyone that waited until the last minute found themselves struggling, trying to keep up with what to do next. That should fix it. We should be good on Blog Talk now. Should be good on Blog Talk. Okay. All right. So everybody over the past 2 years has been waiting for this event. Everybody has been waiting to see what was going to happen, hoping for delays. Some of us were preparing. As I was saying, the past 72 hours has been interesting. Who knew that all of the protests, all of the different actions and letters written and phone calls to Congress, who knew that all we had to do was everybody go online at the exact same time, shut down all of these companies? And that's what happened. It was pretty awesome to see that. A little sad that people had 2 years to prepare and waited till the last minute. I can tell you that in my fleet, I have actually used 4 different systems over the past 2 years, trying to find the solution that I liked best. Out of those systems, I narrowed it down to 2 that I thought were pretty good, and 1 that I've decided to go with for my entire fleet. over the past couple of years using these different systems, we have learned how to run under the rules. We have learned how the hardware works, how the software works. We've learned the loopholes, the glitches, what to do, what not to do. And it took the 2 years to figure that out, to be efficient and make it work. And believe me, if I had went out and just bought one at the spur of the moment, put it in the trucks and pulled the trigger and said, let's go, I would have been extremely disappointed, because there were just too many glitches and too many things I didn't like about some of the first systems we used. There are going to be a lot of people disappointed with the choices that they made. I guarantee it. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because the first thing people will start doing is figuring out how to cheat these systems. And of course, there are ways to cheat. Nobody ever said there wasn't a way to cheat, but it's a lot more difficult to cheat, and it's a lot easier to get caught. Of course, there are ways, backdoor ways to edit some of these systems in the AOBR mode. There are ways to log out, unplug the units, what have you. But when you do those things, it throws up a lot of red flags, and again, makes it easier to get caught. That being said, at Patriot Star, we've been on these systems for well over close to 2 years. We started with some of the app-based that were not plugged into the trucks, and then we went to the full ELD or ARBR systems. And we've been on this type of a system now for, as I said, close to 2 years in one form or another. And, you know, completely plugged into the trucks for a good 18 months now. And we learned how to make that work. And, you know, yes, we've had logbook violations. Yes, there's been some bumps in the road, things that we had to learn how to overcome. But that 2 years gave us the opportunity, while we still had the flexibility of switching units or going back to paper if we needed to, or whatever we needed to do, we had that 2 years to learn these systems. Well, it's gone now. There is no more opportunity. You are either on it or you're not. So it's interesting to see, it will be interesting to see how it all plays out in the end. There are a lot of people that are still on paper. A lot of people that fall into a loophole of one type or another. They may be on the in a 99 or older truck, or they may be short haul, or maybe they just don't care and they're going to take their lashings. So let's go over a few of the rules as they stand now. 2000, model year 2000 engines and newer must have an engine connected ELD device unless you're running short haul local operations, which the majority of you are not if you're listening to my show, typically going to be short haul. Some of you may fall into that category, but the majority of you are over the road. So if you have a 2000 or newer truck, you will have to have the engine connected device. FMCSA also put out some new guidelines for personal conveyance rules. We want to talk about that a little bit tonight. Unfortunately, the rules and the guidance that they put out is not all that, not great. I think we may have to learn some new tricks in this industry. So that'll be interesting as well. All that being said, like it or not, ELDs are here. I am not pro ELD, but the one thing that this show has always been about is learning how to use the regulations in our favor. That's what I want to do here. I've never been pro ELD, but I have always been in favor of learning how to use the regulations to our betterment, our benefit. My tablet is causing interference over here, so let's get this out of the way. All right. One thing, if you followed me in the past, that I have always tried to explain to people is that miles are not the most important factor when you're quoting a load. They never have been. Your truck's life is measured in miles. Your life is measured in minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. Miles are only a factor of cost and time. Cost for equipment cost for maintenance cost, and time. It costs time to travel the highways. You can only travel a finite speed. So miles are a cost, but they are not a good indicator of revenue. So anybody out there, and I am going to do a video to more specifically, just a short little 10 or 20 minute video just on this topic of quoting a load and understanding your numbers, both on a daily basis and a per mile basis, cost-wise. And it's important to understand what your costs are in both of those categories. Your daily cost as well as your variable mileage cost. There are a lot of people out there that only go with the daily cost. And previously, from December 17th back to the beginning of time, that kind of sort of worked. Depending on the variables. Could have worked. But it wasn't always the best indicator. Now that this mandate has come into play, it's moved up a little bit on the notch. It's a little bit better. Still not ideal. We still have to take in our variable costs into consideration. So we still have to understand what our daily cost is and what our mileage cost is to know whether or not a run is profitable. Then there are those on the other side that are strictly cost per mile based businesses. That was always a little higher in the ranking than a cost per day on its own, but it was still not ideal because you didn't take time into account. Now that the ELD mandate is in place, most carriers now will be strict on their times. We have to be. We have to follow the hours of service. That being said, time is a much bigger factor now than miles. Miles, again, are only a factor of cost and time. So a flat rate per mile, whatever your cost per mile is or whatever your target rate per mile is, throw it out the window, because I guarantee you that at this point, that is absolutely not going to be the best way to judge a profitable load. You have to factor your time. I've talked about this for years, but now more than ever, time is extremely important. Once we start moving the focus off of a rate per mile and start looking at the time involved in a shipment, then we can start addressing the problems. All of the problems. Because it's not just about detention. It's not just about layover. It's not just about running out of time on your 14 hours or trying to make that 800-mile run in one day. It's all of those factors. Everything comes into play now. You used to be able to make it work on paper, and that doesn't work anymore. Now we have to follow the rules. So that's going to require efforts on every aspect of the business. Customers have to understand this. Drivers have to understand it. Carriers have to understand it. Brokers have to understand it. For the first time, brokers are going to have to understand hours of service well enough that they can explain it to their shippers and receivers that they work with, their customers. Because they have to make the shippers and receivers understand that the time that the truck is on site is more valuable now than it ever has been before. Previously, nobody cared about time because time was flexible. Time is never flexible, but people made it flexible on paper logs. I am not pro ELD, but I am pro-driver. And I really do believe that an ELD will change the industry to better benefit the driver. It will start taking the stress off of the driver, putting it where it belongs, on the carriers, on the brokers, on the shippers and receivers, to put a value on that time. I've been telling people for a long time on the carrier side, put a value on your time and make sure you're charging for the time appropriately. But now, finally, we're going to have the leverage, and not just the leverage, but the need for that thought process to go up the chain. Brokers, shippers, receivers, they have to start to value our time. So, hopefully, the phone lines are cleared up a little bit there. I'm not sure why we have some feedback, but let's see if we can get it straight. We have a few phone calls. If anybody has any questions or comments, if you're watching the live stream on Facebook or on YouTube, dial the number at the bottom of your screen, 917-889-9924. We are streaming live, Facebook, YouTube. We are recording the show for playback later on L&J Radio. We have several recorded shows in the queue, and we'll start pushing those out again here very soon. We will not have a show next week. Next Monday, just less than a week away, is Christmas Day. I will be with family on the day after Christmas following, so we will not have a show. I'll be traveling on that day. So be sure to check out our recorded shows. You can find those at blogtalkradio.com/trucking with authority. You can also find all the recorded shows and the links to the previous recorded shows at the Trucking with Authority Facebook groups. We will get to some phone calls. Let's go to Dave in North Carolina. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kenny, how are you?
Good. How can we help you?
Yes, sir. I've got a question in regards to lumper services. So if you are a driver, and let's say you are pulling a reefer or dry van, you go to a receiver and they're requiring lumper services in order to get unloaded.
Mm-hmm.
As the driver or the carrier, are you able to do unload the trailer yourself and pocket additional money? Is that possible, or are you sort of forced to go through those lumper services?
It's possible. It's a little difficult. One of the reasons, you have to go back and think about why these companies are using lumper services to begin with. To start with, the reason lumper services exist is because the product does not belong. Typically, these are at grocery warehouses. The product does not belong to the store. It still belongs to the shipper. Most of the time, the products are on consignment at the stores. And the store doesn't take delivery of it until it's actually on the shelf in the actual retail area of the store. It's not their product. They don't take the actual product until it's off of the truck and received by the store. Okay? Because of that, that's why lumper services exist. So the shipper is required to unload the trucks. Not the carrier, not the driver. The shipper is required to unload the trucks. So when there's a lumper service, that lumper service is hired by the shipper. Now the carrier or the driver is only the courier of the money. Now granted, in most cases, the carrier advances the money. They might pay for the lumper out of pocket or write a com check themselves, but they're reimbursed by the shipper typically. Sometimes it may be an all-in rate, which would include that lumper, but the shipper is paying for the lumper services. Okay? Now, one of the reasons that the stores don't unload it themselves is liability. If they start to unload that trailer and there's damages, now the store has damaged product that doesn't belong to them. So they allow the shipper to hire these third-party lumber companies that represent them. The lumber companies typically, and the reason I had to explain all that is because the lumber companies typically are insured and willing to take the risk if product is damaged or if there's extra packaging needed or what have you. Okay, so yes, as a driver, you could unload that, but if there are damages, that money is coming out of your pocket. Now, in order to prevent that, typically, in order for the shipper to reimburse for that, they want the EIN number of the lumber service that you used. So you as a driver probably don't have an EIN number as a lumber service. You might have it as a carrier, but you won't have any proof that you unloaded the truck as a lumber service. Now, I know carriers that have gone so far as to go out and start a separate lumber service company, and the drivers lump their own freight and they charge for it. It's kind of a backdoor way to do this, but most drivers don't want to unload their own trucks. So you could do it, just be cautious. There is some risk involved. You could be liable if there's damages, or even worse, if you got hurt, or if you hurt somebody else or damaged other property other than just your load. If you're using one of their forklifts or pallet jacks and you run through a wall or bump over somebody else's product or something like that, there is risk and liability there. And another way that the shippers and receivers prevent that is they won't let you use their forklifts and pallet jacks and so forth. In some cases, they won't even let you use your own if you were to bring it without being able to certify that you have the proper training and so forth. However, by law, they cannot force the carrier or the driver to hire somebody else to do it. So yes, you could, but there are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to.
Got it. Okay, and then as far as, let's say if you're a one-man operation, would you just carry cash in the truck with you to pay for those services?
You could. That gets a little risky. Truck drivers don't always go into the best areas. I don't like to carry a whole lot of cash with me. Some of these lumber services, I've been charged as much as, I've been actually charged up to $1,000 for one load for lumber services. Gosh. For hand unloading boxes and restacking and repackaging and that kind of thing. Multiple stops, in some cases, each stop requires lumber services. You may have to carry a lot of cash. I wouldn't recommend it. The best way to do it, now, again, typically the carrier or the shipper is paying for it. A lot of times if you're getting this through a broker, the broker has the means to write an EFS check or a com check. However, not every broker does. So it's a good idea. And also a lot of lumber services, some won't even accept cash. Some won't accept credit cards. So it has to be EFS, com check, or a company check. A lot of them won't even accept checks unless they are EFS or com data. You could set up your own accounts. If you have your own authority, you could call Comdata, EFS, Fleet One, and set up your own account with them. It might come with some other perks. Maybe get some fuel, a fuel card or some type of discount program that way. Or if you are going through a factoring company, a lot of times they have that type of a service. So there are, or again, I always recommend everyone, if you're an independent, to join NASTC, N-A-S-T-C, National Association of Small Trucking Companies. By far, they have the best fuel discount program any independent can get. In that, unless you are somehow grandfathered or under the coattails of a bigger fleet, NASTC is the best fuel card program. They use a Fleet One card, and if you have their Fleet One card, you can also write checks off of that as well. You could even do if you don't have the credit rating to do that, you could get a prepaid account, so you could have some money in reserves on that account that you could write EFS checks off of for lumpers and so forth. So there's other ways to do it. But cash, it could work, but I don't like carrying that much cash. And I wouldn't want all my drivers carrying that much cash either.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great night, and thank you for the call. If you have any more questions or comments, numbers at the bottom of the screen, 917-889-9924. Talking about the ELD mandate. It's a new dawn, the future of trucking. Things are changing. Things have changed over the past couple of years. We have been building up to this, in the past 72 hours. A lot of people waited to the last minute, jumped on board, and it's happening. I've already followed some of the Facebook posts. There have been tickets being issued already. Tickets are being issued. Fines will be levied against carriers. To clear things up, the out-of-service orders will not start until April 1st. If you do not have an LED or an ELD, if you do not have an ELD installed in your truck, you will not be put out of service until April 1st. They have delayed that portion of the mandate because they knew there would be people that didn't want to comply, that would have trouble getting the devices installed in time and so forth. They've delayed out-of-service orders, and they've delayed CSA points for certain violations. However, you could still be fined and ticketed. You will be fined and ticketed. And if you are on paper logs, other hours of service violations will result in CSA points. So if you don't have the ELD in your truck, you'll be issued the citation for that. But if you have any other hours of service violations whatsoever, you will be possibly placed out of service. You will be levied CSA points, fines, tickets, and so forth. If you don't have an ELD, they are going to look deeper. So be extremely careful about that. If you have any questions or comments, I see there's a lot of people asking questions on the live feeds, but it's way too difficult for me to try to read through those as we're going. They just keep scrolling as I'm talking. I can't keep up. So the best way to do this is to call the phone. We will get you on the air. Elizabeth is in the other room screening calls. It just works like a regular call-in radio show. Call the number, press number 1 on your keypad once you're in the room. She will bring you on, screen you, get your name. You won't just come on the air with me directly, so you don't have to be nervous about that. She'll get everything you need. Or if you just don't want to come on the air, ask her the question and she will relay that to me. So call 917-889-9924. We will go strong until 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. May go a little overtime, but you know, there was no show last week. I was on the road again, helping out a driver. 2 weeks ago, we went almost 2.5 hours. And I'll tell you what, I was worn out. 2.5 hours is too long, so we're going to cut this down. I don't want to go much over an hour. I may get some last-minute questions. Anybody that calls in and it's on the line by 8 p.m., I will get your questions answered. So 917-889-9924. If you don't call in by 8, I can't guarantee I'll be able to get you on the air. All right, so now I will say there are a lot of people making some comments on here. Huh, okay. People making comments about people being put out of service already, fines, tickets, and so forth. There is no out of service. FMCSA has delayed any out of service orders for not having an ELD. If you do not have an ELD, you will not be put out of service, but you will get a ticket. There could be fines for that ticket. There's no out of service order. If after April 1st, you don't have an ELD in your truck when you get pulled in, it'll be equivalent to not having logs at all. You're put out of service for a minimum of 10 hours. So right now, there is no out of service order in any state. However, there may be people being put out of service for other log violations right now. FMCSA, the DOT inspectors are out there. They are checking, and I know they have been lenient because they saw the troubles everybody was having. None of the systems worked. None of the systems out there that I've heard of worked 100% correctly. Most of the most popular ones, Keep Truckin' is the one that I've decided to use. Keep Truckin' is probably the best solution I've found so far. Big Road is a great solution as well. I've used that one. I still have a couple of trucks on that I will be switching over. JJ Keller is one of the big ones. There are, you name it, there are dozens of them out there. even the big companies that have been doing this for decades, such as Qualcomm / now Omnitrax and PeopleNet, which are the ones the big fleets use, even they had some glitches because there was just so many people signing up. Apparently their software worked, but they just could not get people signed up fast enough. They don't have enough people manning the phones. And that's really what happened with all of these systems. Overwhelm the servers. I mean, everybody, all hands on deck, everybody was logging in new people at the same time, overwhelmed the servers, and it just crashed everything. And because of that, and as at the same time, because of the mandate, they had to push out some new updates for the way that these apps and so forth had to be able to relay the information, send the files to the DOT officers and so forth. So there was every single app out there had a last-minute update, and those last-minute updates being pushed along with all the influx of the new registrations, the new accounts being set up, crashed almost every system out there. They either crashed the servers, they crashed the apps, they crashed the devices, or they just couldn't get people signed up because they didn't have enough people on the phones. Every system out there had a problem. That'll probably be a couple of weeks, honestly, before everything gets worked out. And then, of course, you have the people that did wait until the last minute, ordered the device, they got sent the wrong cables, or they got sent the wrong boxes, or they didn't get their shipment at all whatsoever. So there will be a learning curve. There will be a few weeks of people getting set up. FMCSA knew that, which is why they delayed the out-of-service order until April 1st. But again, they did not waive fines and tickets. You could still be put out fined for this, so be very careful. And you know, more people are talking about fines. Yes, I've heard fines, you know, $500+ in some states. Now it's officers' discretion right now. Most states understood the problems that we had the first couple of days. After we go into the, you know, after a week or 2 weeks, they'll be checking. They know that everybody had a chance to get these things installed. If they still haven't, they'll start putting the tickets out. There have been tickets already written for this. Most of the time, it's not just for having the wrong ELD device or not having an ELD device. It's for other hours of service violations. But they are writing tickets. They are starting to check. As time goes on, over the next week or two, start to see that enforcement ramped up. Even the DOT officers understand that the services crashed. They weren't working. So the first couple of days, there's going to be soft enforcement. Over the next couple of weeks, expect that to ramp up. They will be checking everybody as time goes on. All right. So again, what this comes back to is, now that everybody's on the device, we have to learn how to manage our time properly. When it comes to situations which are out of our control, we have to understand the value of our time so that we can charge other people to hold them accountable for holding us up. The biggest of those is detention and layover pay. And furthermore, if you're quoting a load, you have to take that time into consideration. So Sunday, the 17th, you might have been able to get a 700-mile load in through the Northeast, through New York City or what have you. You might have been able to make that work on paper. Now it's not likely. So you really have to understand the value of the time if that load that you could have done in one day now takes you a day and a half or 2 days. That time will change your bottom line. If you've only been going on a rate per mile basis and you haven't been taking time into account, then you're really going to have a wake-up call when you start to look at your numbers at the end of the week and the end of this month. You have to take your time into account. Again, I'm going to do another video specific on how to quote a load and to use time, but figure out what your annual fixed expenses are. So your truck payment, if you have to rent a spot for parking, your office expenses, your phone, all your fixed expenses. Break those down into a daily cost. And I'm not talking about 365 days a year, because none of us works 365 days a year, even if you live in the truck, because I guarantee you those wheels are not turning. You're not under a load 365 days a year. So you have to figure out a reasonable time that you are actually working, not just away from home, but the time that you're actually, the days that you're actually generating revenue, or that you're available to generate revenue. And that costs need to be divided up over that time. Then you have to figure out what your cost per mile is only as it pertains to your variable expenses, which is your fuel, obviously. You have to figure in your maintenance cost. Okay, now when you figure, I hope all of you figure your cost per mile on all of your expenses. Knowing your cost per mile overall, including your variable, including everything, knowing all of your expenses together is super important. An easy way to do that is to print out your profit and loss sheet. You can typically, if you're using a program like QuickBooks, which is what I recommend, print out your profit and loss sheet. You can export that to an Excel file. It's easy to take your mileage for the week, the quarter, the year, what have you, whatever period of time that your numbers correspond with, take that mileage and just put another column on a spreadsheet. It's really easy to do the math, and you can just drag that all the way down, and you can quickly figure out what each category is for a cost per mile. That's the easiest way to do it, and I'll talk about this more in another video as well. But once you know your cost per mile, a profit and loss sheet is going to have two sections. It will have your fixed expenses, and it will have your variable expenses, okay? Take that top section. That's the section that you need to forget about mileage, just for the purposes of quoting a load on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Forget about your mileage on that section. The bottom section is still super important. Look at that total and that cost per mile and pay attention to that. On the top section that's fixed, mileage doesn't matter. The only thing that matters there is your time. Figure out what that is over time. We'll talk about that more in another video. Figure out your time cost. Add that up for every day that a load will take for you to deliver. So if it's 1,000 miles, you can do 500 a day. That's 2 days worth. That daily cost needs to be covered first. Then your mileage cost needs to be covered on top of that. That is your absolute minimum. Okay, so one thing that I want to talk about is do not forget to include your driver pay in that rate somewhere. It could either be if you're on a salary, put it in your fixed cost. If you are pay yourself by the mile, put it on your mileage cost. Wherever you want to put that driver pay, put it in there somewhere. And know that if you drop below the rate, all of your other expenses are out of your control. Just because you want to give your customer 5 cents more off a mile doesn't mean your truck's going to save 5 cents a mile in fuel. The only place that you can cut your expenses is out of driver pay or company profit, either one, however you want to look at this. The only place you can cut expenses, now you can cut expenses by saving elsewhere, getting more efficient processes in place, better fuel economy and so forth. But once your numbers are set, the only way that you can drop below your actual cost is to cut from your driver pay or your company profit. If you're doing that, you need to understand that you're doing that. I understand that it's a competitive world out there. Maybe it makes sense to do that from time to time. But understand that that's what's happening. Just because you're running for 50 cents a mile doesn't mean that you got better fuel economy, whatever the case may be. Doesn't mean that your truck payment will be less. It doesn't mean anything else. The only place that you can take money from that you have control over is your own pay. So understand that and be very, very careful not to throw away your time as well. Because your truck payment keeps coming out of your bank. Your insurance you have to keep paying that. So if your load takes 2 days, you have to keep paying it. If it takes a week, you have to keep paying it. Understand what your time is worth. Now, said all that to say this. I want to make this very clear. This is only as it pertains to how you perceive the load that you're trying to book or plan out your week. You need to know the time involved and your cost over that time. Do not start thinking about your overall cost per day, ever. Your variable cost changes. A lot of people start thinking about the rates the way I just explained it, and then they start shooting for a target number of $800, $1,000, $1,500, whatever that number is. They start shooting for that target per day, which could work if everything else, fell into the right parameters. But a rate per day by itself is not the best way to do this. That being said, a rate per mile for just the opposite reason is not ideal either. Let me give you a quick example on why a rate per mile or your cost per mile can change depending on how many miles you drive. If you were to buy a brand new $150,000 truck and you parked it in your driveway, you put insurance on it, and your cost every month, you have to pay $4,000 between your truck payment and your insurance and whatever else. If you never drive that truck at all, and that truck sits in your driveway, it's $4,000 a month all the time. If you drive it 1 mile per month, the cost is $4,000 per month. Per mile, rather. $4,000 per mile, because you only drove it 1 mile per month. All right? If you drove 4,000 miles, it's $1 per mile. Okay, so it varies with the mileage that you drive. And unless you know without a doubt that you will drive exactly 123,327 miles this year, or whatever the number is, exactly, you do not know what your exact cost per mile is every single trip. There's no way. You can only make predictions and assumptions. Now, the same goes with days. I can't tell you that you will work exactly 263 days this year. I can't tell you that. But if you are off, and do the math on this, if you are off by a week or two either way, it's going to vary your numbers by a few bucks on any load. If you are off by a few days and it's your mileage that you're basing it on, it's going to change your numbers by thousands of dollars every year. Thousands. All right. Check the boards here. I have a lot of calls. I had my switchboard in the back. Let me get back on. All right. Here's something that I wanted to talk about. We need to start putting pressure on the shippers and receivers and brokers and so forth about the time that they hold us. I want to bring Dave on from Connecticut. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kenny.
Hey, Dave. I see Elizabeth's got your comment here, and this is exactly what I wanted to go with this. What's your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, so I'm starting to run into an issue where I'm trying to piecemeal loads together, and I make arrangements with brokers to be able to park on site, and they make deals, where I can park on site, and I show up to a customer, and the customer says I can't park on site. So I'm wondering if walking away from loads is a tool that we need to start using. I never felt like this was a good idea, but it's starting to be something that I need to do. Just cut bait and run and get my break in or do whatever else I need to do to reposition and be within my hours of service. And I think you're on the same page as me with this.
Yes. Okay, so now today you did this. This is a situation where you were going to the shipper, right? Or was it the receiver? You're going to a shipper, and they would not let you park. They would not let you park on the property overnight to load the first thing the next morning, right? And you decided that because of that, it wouldn't work for you because now that's going to start your clock, and that's going to throw your whole day off, and it just turns that load because of the time involved now is not profitable, not the way you would like it to be, right?
Yeah, it would have affected the next load, and the same thing earlier in the week. There was a possibility that, with the appointment that was scheduled, I was told it was a different time. It would have ran me into another day had it not been loaded right away.
Yes, and
on that one there, I got it loaded, but had they waited any longer, I would have missed my appointment. I definitely would have ran into another day, at which point I would have cut bait and ran on that load. But thankfully, I got it loaded.
Yeah. Now, I agree with you. That being said, we have to be a little bit careful about this because if you were to park at a shipper or receiver, when you start loading first thing in the morning, technically you have to go on duty at that point. So your 14-hour already starts ticking. So even if you're just maneuvering around, and the ELDs are going to put you on duty, even if you're on a yard move, you're just moving local, just 5 miles an hour. Now, some people are on an AOBR, and there's a little bit of flexibility for the first 2 years on the settings, and some people they might have a 2-mile exemption, or they might have a 10 or 15 mile an hour limit before it kicks you onto the drive line. But a true compliant ELD is going to throw everybody on the drive line before you hit 5 miles per hour. So even if you park at a shipper or receiver overnight, as soon as you start loading or unloading the next morning, your clock starts ticking. So you have to be a little careful with that. I do agree that if it's a situation where the nearest place to park is 2 hours away, they won't let you park there and there's no other alternative. Yeah, we need to look at the time involved. If we have a half hour, 2 hours to drive before we can get there, and then you have to wait for them to unload you or load you for who knows how long, then absolutely, that might be something when we're dispatching, we have to take that into account. That being said, I think where we can shift more of this is on the actual loading and unloading times. So even if you can't park there overnight, if you can park 10 minutes away and a half hour away, if you drive in that first half hour, again, even if you parked on site, your clock is going to start ticking. Your 14 hours, the second you move your truck into the door or you go to check in, your clock starts ticking then anyhow. So we have to remember that. What we do have to do is hold the shippers and receivers accountable for their detention time. So one thing that I like to say is people in the industry say the first 2 hours are free, and they use that word free. We had a discussion in the Motor Carrier Meetup group, the Facebook group, about what do we charge detention or how are we going to charge that? Because that's a big issue now. I don't want detention. I don't ever want to charge somebody more than the rate that I initially quoted. But my initial quote, whenever you book a truck, it's a reasonable loading and unloading time, and the industry standard is typically 2 hours. Now, I know you do some pad wrap also, and we get into customers that might have more than 2 hours, in which case those loads typically pay more because there is more involved. But those 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours, whatever it is to load and unload, are not free hours. Those are paid hours. So what do we need to do? If they go over the time that they've paid for, we have to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they pay additional. Now, here's where I think carriers really should start putting pressure on. If the shippers or brokers, what have you, do not want to pay for our time, okay, you got what you paid for. I showed up for 2 hours. I need a truck order not used. The load isn't ready. We're leaving. If you're loaded and you're at a receiver, and this goes back to why I've done a whole lot of shows about contracts. You have to read the contracts. Carriers have a lot of rights on how they can handle the shipment once it's on the truck. Once the carrier, the driver, has that bill of lading in hand, for all intents and purposes, the freight on that trailer belongs to the driver. The driver can pretty much do anything they want with it. Don't take that out of context. I don't want people just selling the stuff, right? But essentially, we have a lot of leverage when you have that bill of lading in your hand, all right? Which means if you show up to a receiver and they take more than 2 hours, they don't want to pay detention, start looking for other alternatives, other warehouses, other trucks that could redeliver, other things that you can do with it. It's easier at the shipper. At 2 hours, at 2 hour point, or whatever you have included in your initial rate, if they don't want to pay beyond that, leave. Find something else. Find another load. I will tell you this. We're a broker as well, and we do quite a few LTL shipments. Now, LTL shipments, notoriously, obviously, they have multiple stops on their trucks. And we have dealt with these LTL carriers that send a straight truck, a box truck out, and they will do multiple stops throughout a city or town. They might pick up 10 different little partial pieces. They'll take it back to one central warehouse where they consolidate it all, put it on a 53-foot truck, and ship it across the country. If that straight truck has 10 stops throughout the day, now mind you, a lot of these straight trucks are also on ELDs, unless they are literally running within that city. A lot of these straight trucks are also on ELDs. If they have multiple stops, they don't have time to wait even 2 hours. Most LTL carriers, at 30 minutes, they just leave. They don't even call you to tell you that they're leaving. They just leave. Now, can you imagine FedEx or UPS pulls up to deliver a package and you say, just wait for me for half an hour or 2 hours or whenever I'm ready? They'll just leave. And they may contact you, maybe leave a postcard and say, we'll come back to redeliver this. Carriers have to start doing that too. Now, on the full truckload segment, 2 hours is typically considered reasonable, but it can be up to the carrier's discretion. That first 2 hours for most shipments is included, but use that in a negotiation as well. So I talked about this on Jason Pote's show, on the Truckers Coach show. He had me on as a guest a couple of weeks ago. And we had talked about using detention and the way to negotiate for leverage. You say, look, I need $1,000 to move this load. And it will be $50 an hour. That first 2 hours is included, and it will be $50 an hour after that 2 hours. Or if you need 4 hours on this to load and unload, I will do the 4 hours, that 2 hours included on the shipping end, for $1,100. I will do it up front. So you have the choice. You can pay me up front, $50 an hour, and you get 4 hours, or you can pay me $50 an hour after the first 2. It's your choice. What's better for you? You could even back that all the way up and say, okay, I will do this load for $900. $50 an hour starts the second I get there. As soon as I check in, it's $50 an hour. If you take 2 hours to load me, it's $1,000, which is what your initial rate was anyway, right? So you can use that in your negotiation. And I think as we start to see more and more carriers take time into consideration, these are the types of things that we will see change in the industry.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of people walking away from shipments towards the end of the 14-hour clock, and then that's going to have to happen before detention is collectible.
I believe, I think here's been the problem for years, okay? There's always been people talking about, I need to put pressure on these shippers or receivers for detention or layover or truck order not used or whatever it is. There's always been pressure for that. But 80% of the industry is still on paper logs. So the shippers, receivers, the brokers, I'll just find another truck that's not going to bitch. If you're going to give me a hard time about it, I'll just find somebody else. Well, now that 80% has been whittled down. I think there's only a handful of people, you know, relative to the entire industry. There's a handful that are in that 99 and older type trucks. And that handful are not going to be enough. The leverage now is on the carrier side. We can say, as the majority are going to say, we have to be held, the shippers, receivers have to be held accountable for their time. The majority, there's nobody else that can make it work. There's no more flexibility of paper to make it work. So time will become a factor. Shippers and receivers do know this. Contrary to what popular belief, shippers and receivers, Walmart, who is what everybody loves to hate Walmart for shipping and receiving for the DCs, they have been making huge changes lately. They're notorious. The infamous thing they've done recently is if you show up early or late, it's understandable if you show up late for an appointment, but if you show up early for an appointment, they're going to fine the carrier. And why is that? You would think that they would want this stuff early. Well, they literally have hundreds of trucks coming in all day long, and if a bunch of trucks showed up in a group early, now they have a backlog of people waiting. They don't have room to put the trucks. And it just causes a ripple in their whole process. They do take a long time to load and unload because there's just so many of trucks there at any given time. If trucks are not falling into their schedule, then it throws off everything. So they're fining you even if you show up early. So, and I was reading today, I don't know if this is true or not, but there are shippers now that if you don't have enough time on your clock when you check in, they're going to turn you away at the gate, which may be true. I also know, for anybody that's trying to fall into one of these loopholes, there are shippers and brokers that will not load trucks now that are not ELD compliant. And that may mean that if you have a 99 and older truck, you're technically compliant if you don't have an ELD. But since there's no way for them to know, they're just not going to load an older truck. They just won't do it. So we will see changes on both sides of this. We will see more pressure put on carriers. We will see more pressure put on the shippers and receivers. And brokers now will need to start educating the customers. Brokers, if they don't know the rules, and a lot of brokers don't, the brokers are going to have to learn the hours of service rules and learn how they work. There are some brokers, a lot of good brokers came from the trucks. They were drivers once before and they understand it. But there are a lot out there that don't. They're going to have to learn the hours of service rules, and they're going to have to educate the shippers and receivers on how this is going to work. The industry is changing. It has to, one way or the other.
Do you know that printout that was emailed to everybody for that Keep Trucking ELD? Is that something that we need when on the EOBR, or is everything that we have from before, the guidance card, is that still accurate?
We need to update what that is, the new software, the new apps, and most of the app providers, the bring your own device style apps, most of them over the past few days have pushed out a lot of updates. So for anybody out there that's running one of these devices, a lot of them have, and even, it could be the OmniTrax, PeopleNet, the standalone type devices as well. If you are using an ELD, or what was an AOBR or is an AOBR, because of this mandate, a lot of them over the past few days have pushed out a lot of updates. And it has to do with the way files are transferred to an inspector during an inspection. So you have to have the most up-to-date card that has detailed instructions step by step on what has to happen for the inspector. So yes, that update, we need to print those, and we need to have those in all of our trucks.
Okay, that was my last question.
All right, Dave, I appreciate it, and thank you. And that is Columbia Glider Dave on YouTube, and he is a contractor for me here at Patriot Star. And he's up there he lives up there in the Northeast where nobody else likes to run, and that's his home territory. And he is doing fantastic up there. Running up in that Northeast where most people struggle to get rates, he pulls it off. So if anybody has any questions and things about that, again, he's got a YouTube channel called Columbia Glider Dave, and he puts a lot of stuff out over there. So we're going to go to Chris in Tennessee. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kenny, how's it going, man?
Great. How can we help you, Chris?
I was wanting to have you go over what we talked about last night about the officers giving drivers a hard time being able to reproduce paper logs,
Right.
Not being able to email or fax them.
Right.
I think I brought that up because I had seen on Facebook yesterday that someone had actually got a CSA violation for not being able to reproduce a paper version of their log.
Okay, so here's what the question is to clarify that. Chris is another one of Patriot Star pros, leased to us over here at Patriot Star. And the question is, if you are on one of these devices, any of the devices, you get pulled in for an inspection, and for whatever reason, you cannot fax or email the inspector your logs, what do you do? So, for example, you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have cell service. You don't have a signal. Now, most of even the standalone versions, most people are thinking that it's the cell phone app type ELD that I'm talking about, but even the standalone, the OmniTrax, PeopleNet, they work on a cellular network. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere, say you get pulled in on roadside inspection in the valleys there in West Virginia, where there is absolutely zero cell service because there is no cell tower out there. If that happens, you cannot fax or email. What do you do? Now, here's something that I think is going to be up to some officers' discretion. The device is fully capable. And the reason this came up, the reason he originally asked me this was because yesterday, all of these devices were crashing. So what do? You have the device installed. You've done everything right, but the device itself, the servers are crashing. It's out of your control. What do you do? The law says that you have to carry 8 days of paper logs with you. If you have a printer in your truck, you could print them from these devices. If you don't, you have to be given time to reproduce the last 8 days on paper. Or they can review the logs on your device, directly on your device. They can review them. Your device has to be capable, per the law, it has to be capable of sending the emails or faxes. But if it can't because of other environmental outside reasons out of your control, then they have to give you another backup plan, which is why everybody has to carry 8 days of paper logs, which is another point I need to bring up. Dave brought up that we do have to have that card. Every ELD has a driver instruction booklet and an inspection card on step-by-step instructions on what to do and how to walk the system through to provide the inspector with the inspectable files, or to view it on the device or send the emails and so forth. You have to have those cards with you. By law, those cards have to be in the truck with you. You also, by law, are required to have at least 8 days of paper backup logs with you. So again, if you do, you will be allowed time to reproduce those. And over the past couple of days, I think law enforcement has been pretty lax on the enforcement because they understand that this is an issue. And in the case that somebody was pulled into a spot where they did not have the ability because the device was not working, you don't have cell service and so forth, if you don't have that and you were to get a ticket, I'm sure that that's something that if you took it to court, you could easily beat it. So I don't think that it'll be an issue. Again, the reason you carry the 8 days of paper logs is if the device malfunctions. So if you can't send it, you have to be able to reproduce those 8 days on paper. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, that answers my question. I know you talked about rates a little bit. You can touch on this load if you want to. I'm just happy to be on the interstate right now. If there's
Okay, well, this load,
it's been rough.
This is Chris's first week with us at Patriot Star, and he's self-dispatched, and he came over from a company that basically had load planners, self-dispatched but with load planners, and he's completely on his own now. And he's looking for the stuff that nobody else wants to do. He found a load he was down near the Mexican border. He found a load that was going across the border, and I don't think he's ever going to do one of these again. There's a reason that people don't want to do this.
No.
And they took his trailer. He dropped it Saturday. They were supposed to bring it back for him on Monday. We did talk about it beforehand, about the risks that were involved. He decided to go for it. And, of course, he showed up there Monday when he was supposed to pick up his loaded trailer, and it was still sitting there where he dropped it. At that point, honestly, in hindsight, we probably should have just called it off and said, "Hey, we're gonna leave." Going back to what Dave had said a minute ago, we need to just cut our losses at some point. Stuck it out, and here we are. And he just got his trailer back today, just this evening, and he's finally on the road. But detention and things are, they're compensating, but not nearly as much as if we could have got our truck back. So, yeah, it's
right.
All of these things have to be.
And I don't.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just say, like what I said earlier. I don't know, as the way the load stands right now, everything that was in the rate con is out the window. I don't know if that constitutes a whole renegotiation of the load, or we just haul it for what it was originally negotiated for.
We're gonna have to go back to
on that part.
We're gonna have to go back to the table on this one. Again, you have the tricky part about this is that your trailer went across the border, so you were without a trailer.
Right.
And this is where things got sticky for us because you don't have a lot of leverage when they own your equipment. They took it. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Now that you have it back, you have the bill of lading in hand, the load is yours. Now we're going to go back to the drawing board, and we're going to talk about this again with the broker because this did not go as planned. And we're looking at a holiday weekend here before you get it delivered. So we're definitely going to be back at the negotiation table in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't answer. He kept trying to get me to nail down some numbers and stuff, and I told him we'll talk about it in the morning. I want the trailer back first.
Right, yeah, which is the most important thing because at that point, when they have your equipment and they've got it in another country, it makes things difficult. So with that, I'm going to put you back on hold. We are going a little into overtime. I said we were going to cut things off at the top of the hour, but I've got a couple more calls here. We're going to go to, and Elizabeth, I see there's somebody else here that's got their hand raised. If you're listening, if you can screen that last call, we will get everybody on the air tonight. Go to Tom in New York. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. I see you're.
Am I connected?
You're here. How can we help you?
A lot of drivers really don't know this, and it is not my opinion. I'm one of the old heads. I got gray hair. And a lot of the guys I associate with have been out here 25, 30 years, 35 years. And we've been talking about this for several years now. And we all understand why the ATA and its associated members want the electronic logs. It's to manage their business better and track their IFTA miles. It does it automatically.
Yep.
And you agree, correct?
I do agree with that, yeah.
But do you realize why the ATA wanted the electronic logs besides that reason?
Well, what is your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm asking you a question first, and then I'll tell you me and the old head's thoughts.
I do have my opinions on it, I suppose. But what's your reasoning behind it?
You don't want to share your opinions? I mean, that's fine.
The level of the playing field is the one argument that always comes to mind on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they say. But
Right.
do you know what the real reason is?
No, I don't. What is the reason?
Because every single trucking company has dozens and dozens of other companies that they own under different business names.
Mhm.
And their lawyers and their accountants have been working on this for 20 plus years. And they were waiting for the right politicians to get in office to pass it through Congress to get it put into MAP 21. Because all of those other related companies have stock ownership in almost every single ELD company that manufactures the ELDs. So
that's possibility.
basically, that is basically the only real logical reason. But, you know, if the ELD was a choice, that's all well and good. Let the big trucking companies manage their men, their women, their drivers, their miles, everything else. But they actually got it passed through. They only added 2 sentences, and they knew that some lobbyists somewhere, if they paid off the right lobbyists and the right amount of them with, suitcases filled with $100 bills in a vehicle and said, "Here, keep the keys and everything in it," and then, as long as you vote yes to get that ELD mandate put into place, that is the real reason that these trucking companies wanted the ELDs.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're into playing the stock market,
I'll tell you what.
If you're into playing the stock market, the past few days, if you invested in these companies that provide these ELDs, stocks spiked in a big way in the past couple of days, and I expect over the next few weeks and months.
But think about this. Think about this just for a minute. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of the guys here are owner operators with their own authority. I have my own customers. I don't really have to use brokers too much, and whatever. But think about this just for a minute. They've been working on this since the early '90s.
Mm-hmm.
The ATA and associated trucking companies, and their accountants and their lawyers, and they figured out, well, wait a minute, this is well above so many billions of dollars if we can just wait for the right time to get it passed through Congress and get it put into a law. And they've been working on this since the early '90s. If you can do the simple math what's that?
Yeah, they've definitely been working. I mean,
what'd you say, Kenny?
The first company to go in was Werner, and I think that was actually in the late '80s. So, and
yeah, but that wasn't for money reasons. That's because their CSA score was so bad. They were required to go to electronic logs.
Well, it was at the time that was their Hail Mary. They were begging FMCSA for another solution. It was either go out of business or you go on these devices. And, this is what they came up with.
And that's why they went on the devices.
Right. And I do think
that's why they went on.
I do think that there is a lot of fleet management tools and a lot of the bigger fleets have gone to these electronic devices for that reason. And I think that there is a lot to be said for the level of the playing field, although I think the level of the playing field works for the small carrier just as well as the mega fleets. I really do think.
Well, I mean, the mega fleets work on volume. They don't work on rate per mile.
Right.
Okay. They say, wait a minute, we have 10,000 trailers, and we'll move so many with our 10,000 trailers. We'll move everything that all your warehouses actually put out, no matter which country they come from, and we'll dedicate so many trucks. And they have more trucks than trailers, and big fleets work on volume. But the real reason these ELDs are a law now is because they sat down in plenty of conference room tables and said, wait a minute, we're going to wait for the right politicians to get in office and make it a law, and they're going to make hundreds of billions of dollars on the stock ownership. Some of these trucking companies actually finance companies that manufacture the ELDs.
Like which ones?
I'm not going to say that over the air.
Okay. Because, I mean, do you know of one?
One of the old guys knows of 3.
Okay. Well,
So,
I know there are.
It's extremely difficult to find it on the internet.
Well,
he's basically retired. He's got all the time in the world. And I was like, how did you find that out? He goes, well, if you go here and then you drive over here and inquire it in writing, instead of doing it over the internet, and then you have an actual document that you're handing somebody and they notarize it in front of them, then you can get the information. I'm like, how the hell do you know that?
Well, I will say this, most of the bigger companies, like Keep Trucking, for example, is backed by Google.
I didn't say all of them.
Well, I know where you're
most.
going with that, but I will say, and then you've got your OmniTracks and PeopleNet are backed by, bigger corporations, parent corporations. So they're all on publicly traded companies. So it's pretty easy to trace those back. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of, and there's a lot of the software companies as well that are pushing this. I mean, certainly there are a lot of companies out here, even if there are companies that are not associated with the trucking companies directly at all. And there are definitely lobbyists out there that are looking at dollar signs when they see this mandate go into effect, whether or not they're owned by trucking companies.
They already got their Kenny, I don't mean to interrupt you, but they already got their truckloads of $100 bills and suitcases.
Yeah, and then
because the mandate is in place.
But then if they own stock in these companies as well, the ones that dumped the suitcases of money on them are the stockholders in these companies, and they're making billions of dollars off it as well. So I see where you're coming from, and every law. I mean, Washington D.C. is the most corrupt.
No, this isn't my opinion now.
Yeah,
this isn't my opinion.
Okay.
This is a group of old guys that we talk, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? These older guys might be onto something. I mean, $100 bills, can't really be traced to whoever's accepting them.
Right.
I mean, you can pull a vehicle into a storage space and leave it there and say, here's the combination to it. You can pick it up whenever you want.
And I'm sure that there's a lot of that happening. And, like I was saying, Washington, D.C.
Well,
is
it already happened. It already happened.
And it happens.
That's why we.
And it happens every day.
That's what I'm trying to say to you, Kenny.
Right, and it happens every day.
Oh, I know.
For everybody. And, inside the Beltway, there is a lot of that going on. And that's one of the reasons why this whole country has got laws that don't make sense. But at this point, it is what it is.
Well,
Go ahead.
No, I agree with you. But a lot of drivers don't realize it. It's not. I mean, it's not about safety. Safety is going to go down. It's about crooked politicians getting paid off to get a law put into place, and then the trucking companies and their related dozens and dozens and dozens of other companies that are not trucking companies, they have stock in the companies that manufacture the ELDs. And they figure, well, if we make it a law, we'll make billions and billions and billions of dollars. Well, now this is today.
Yeah, and I agree. There is a lot of that going on. But you have to look at the other side of this, too. The trucking industry as a whole is looked upon by most people as dirty, out of control, meth heads from the 70s movies that that was the stereotype, and a lot of people still think that truck drivers are that way, and the general public thinks that this law is a good idea. That is one of the things that we're battling.
Yeah, I know.
So there are roughly
I know that is
there are roughly 2.5 million
I
truck
didn't
drivers.
mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, there are roughly 2.5 million truck drivers, and maybe 10 million, but that are somehow related to either truck drivers or the carriers, or they work for them, whatever. Let's say it's 10 million, but there are over 300 million people. I think 350 million people in this country alone, and another 35, 40 million in Canada that have all pushed to get these things. And and Canada is right around the corner. Canada will be coming up soon. So the majority of people think that we need these. And the way that it's described to them is like a black box in an airplane. I mean, most people can't imagine having an airplane in the sky without the black box, the infamous black box. But here we have all these 80,000-pound death traps, with the meth heads driving them. You know what I mean? So that's the general consensus of the public, and that's who the politicians are trying to win votes. They think this is going to be a good thing. I think we're going to see.
Yeah, they're trying. They targeted the right people at the right time when the right politicians were in office for billions and billions and billions of dollars. Not the politicians and the lobbyists, the trucking companies, related companies. Now I get it. In general, every single truck driver, looking for a lot lizard and doing drugs. No, because I'm one of them. I want nothing to do with a lot lizard, and I've never done drugs in my life. And most of the point, I get what you're saying there, but that's not really the reason. They think that all truck drivers are doing some kind of drugs to keep them awake. Well, that's not everybody. I mean, most smarter owner operators, even on paper logs, are not going to go beyond their normal drive time, because just an investigator, all they got to do is pull up a cell phone record and it says, wait a minute, you're triangulated over here, but your logbook says you were all the way over here if it was ever in a major accident.
And there are a lot of different angles on that, but I'm going to go ahead and put you back on hold, Tom. I appreciate the call, and I do agree that there's a lot of dirty political nonsense going on in Washington that led to this. I think there was a lot of bad publicity that led to this. I think unfortunately, a lot of the protests against it only affirmed why we needed it. And, the trucking industry we are our own worst enemy with this whole thing, because there was no good excuse not to put them in the truck. The biggest complaint was the flexibility of hours of service. And even OIDA and all these other companies and protesters and all this, they went to the politicians, and the only thing they could complain about were hours of service. Or they were making very weak complaints about things that they didn't really understand. And if you look at some of the arguments and the complaints about it today, now that this thing has been implemented, you can see that part of the problem with the reason people are having a hard time adopting it now that they have to be on it is some of them don't even understand the hours of service. They don't understand the rules as they were. So it's very hard to argue against something if you don't understand it. So there was a lot of dirty stuff going on, and the trucking industry was at a disadvantage in this because most people were not educated enough or didn't understand it enough or were led astray by the wrong propaganda, and honestly only made the case worse. So anyway, all that's behind us now. It's with us now. We have to learn how to move forward with it. We did have a couple more questions on the line, but it looks like they falled off. We went a little long with Tom. Let me see if we can pull some of these questions on the other groups here. Bear with me while I read some of these. Some of these are funny, but I'm not going to read them. Drive-away are exempted for now. Not necessarily. Angela says drive-away are exempted for now. Drive-away, tow-away, only some of the drive-away, tow-away operations are exempt right now. If you are driving and the trailer or so forth is the commodity, you are not exempt. If the power unit is the commodity, you are exempt. So, for example, if you're driving an RV, a motorhome, that would be exempt if you're delivering it. Or if you're delivering, the piggyback trucks and the power unit itself is part of the shipment, you would be exempt. But if you are delivering a tow-away operation and the power unit is not part of the shipment, then you're not exempt. And I will refer you to the Indiana trooper that has his Facebook group. He has done a couple of live videos over there, and he's answered a lot of questions about that. And I would love to possibly get him on the show at some point. We will see. And John, perception. Perception is everything. That was the theme of the conference I put on in Kansas City in October. Perception. Perception is everything. And depending on which side of the fence you're on with this whole mandate, your perception may be very different. And I gave Tom all the airtime, and I know some of you have your own opinions on what he was saying with that, but I went ahead and gave him his airtime and let him say his piece. And I'm not going to cut anybody off for having an opinion, or if he said it was his facts. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. And Dave said, so it's a stock market play. Absolutely. It would have been a good time to buy stock in these companies a few years ago, a couple of years ago, or 1 year ago, even 6 months ago. Stocks on all these companies spiked over the past few days. Why won't older trucks be able to load? That's discrimination at its best. Okay, here's the problem with the older trucks. While they will be compliant with the law if they don't have an ELD, if that truck was to go out and get in an accident, and when it goes to court, the prosecuting attorney says there was a device that this truck could have had in it which would have prevented this. If that case loses and there are millions of dollars spent, and it costs a broker or a shipper millions of dollars because they did not have an ELD, even if they were exempt from it, they could have had a device. Everybody else has a device, but they chose to have an older truck and not have a device. There's a liability issue. The other problem is these 99 and older trucks are not required to have it. So if a company says, do you have an ELD? And you say you are compliant, and then they say that you have these older trucks, now the broker, just to protect himself, is going to look at that and say, if you have only 99 and older trucks, I don't believe that you are compliant. I don't know that you're compliant. There's no way for you to prove it, so therefore I'm not going to load you. There are already companies that are doing that. Kenny, the people don't even know their numbers, where to get the numbers, or include driver wages. With the talk of rates reaching heaven's gates, the trucking industry is flooding with newbies that don't even know where to begin negotiating or what can be negotiated. I completely agree with that. There were absolutely, and this happens all the time, 2014 was the last time we saw a major spike in rates. 2014 started out very, very strong. Much like the rates that we're seeing right now, it was started with a spike due to weather conditions. There was some major snowstorms and freezing in December and January 2013 to 2014. That really started the capacity crunch, which I don't remember the last time we saw a first quarter that strong in 2014. And it continued on through the year. But whenever there is a spike in rates, people see that, hey, I could make a killing in trucking. In 2014, you could. You didn't have to know squat about your business. You could fall out of the truck and land in a pile of money in 2014. We're seeing that right now. Right now, you don't have to be good at negotiating. You don't have to know your numbers. You can get out there, buy a truck, and be as wasteful as possible, have poor fuel mileage, do everything wrong, and still succeed for now. For now. Eventually, things will turn. Eventually, you'll have to start pinching pennies, because when more people come in, and this is how supply and demand works. This is why supply and demand works. Rates are going up because capacity is tight. Capacity is tight, rates are up, so it brings more drivers to the table. Once more drivers come to the table, rates will come down, or at least level out. That's how the supply and demand theory works. That's what is supposed to happen. So yes, more drivers will come. As more drivers come, there will be the people that don't know what they're doing. They'll jump in, they'll make a bunch of money over the first few months, then they'll lose everything, go into bankruptcy. Everything will crash. They'll go out of business. And it's a cycle, and it all happens all over again. So you'll have rates go up, more people come to get on the bandwagon and take that money. After a while, rates level out, then people go out of business, and then rates go back up again, and then we have more people come back in. So that's just how the whole process works. So yes, it will happen. I think right now, because of the way and what's forcing it to happen and the long-term effects of this, I think that we are going to see this turnaround take longer than usual. It took a little over a year when it happened in 2014. I think it might take 3 to 5 years. I think we will see over the next year, we're going to see rates plateau. They'll level off. But they'll be level off at a high enough point that I think it'll keep the people that don't know what they're doing, it'll keep them in business. But because you have to follow the hours of service, you have to do some things, you're kind of mandated to do certain things now, I think it'll take a little longer for that cycle to happen. But I think it'll be a good thing overall for a while. Brokers have already started putting an 8-hour detention at pickup and delivery, carrier to pay for repower load. Brokers can put whatever they want, but carriers set the rates. If a broker put that on mine, I would not agree to it. I wouldn't take that load. You heard 2 of my drivers today. If they put that kind of stuff in there and they're not going to pay attention, or they're not going to pay it to what we feel is acceptable, we just won't take that load. We'll fall off of that and we'll leave. Or if we're there for too long and they don't want to pony up, we'll just leave. And when carriers start doing that, which will happen, when carriers start doing that, those terms won't stick. They might find a few carriers that will stick around and try to do this 8-hour thing, and carriers got to repower. That won't last long. I will tell you that they put that kind of stuff on rate confirmations. They also try to put that kind of stuff in the broker-carrier agreements. This is my red pen right here. That stuff gets lined out. All of it. I could show you on my computer, I have thousands of broker-carrier agreements saved. Thousands. There's a handful that I haven't made major changes to. Either myself, Elizabeth's harder on it than I am. As much as I talk about it here, Elizabeth dissects these things down. She'll turn a 10-page contract into a 2-page contract because all that stuff is nonsense, garbage. Most of the time, and I've talked about contracts before, and most of the time they don't even know what they're talking about or why that stuff is in there, and they will usually negotiate that. 8 hours of detention? No, not unless you want to double the rate. And real quick, just reading these last comments, I'm going back to the beginning of the show here. Okay, this is an interesting one. Everything is good with ELD except the 14-hour rule. That is what rushes you as a driver. You have no breathing room, so drivers will leave in droves soon. Possibly. Have to have fun during the day, and the 14-hour limit takes fun out of trucking, like sightseeing or talking with friends or family. But you have to rush through your day like a robot, and if you get tired, you're forced to rush to drive. Lots of people are going to die. Just wait. 14-hour limit is wrong all the way around. 11-hour good, half-hour break good, but 14-hour limit is wrong and many people will die. Possibly. I mean, I understand the logic there, but here's the problem. You have to draw a line somewhere. Where do you draw the line? Hours of service is a problem. I do think that one size does not fit all. But again, where do you draw the line? If it was a 16-hour rule, or if it was an 18-hour rule, or a 20-hour rule, there will still be somebody right up against the clock all the time. There will still be somebody. Where do you draw the line? Maybe you allow split sleeper, however you want to split it. Okay, but how many hours do you work in a day? Where do you draw the line? What do you do? They've decided to draw the line at 14 hours. It kind of goes back to my thoughts on like a speed limiter. Speed limiter, trucks were set at 65 miles an hour. And then the argument comes out of, well, if you're driving 65 miles an hour and you're right up against a speed limiter, what do you do if you blow a tire? You don't have power to power out of it. Okay, so don't drive up against the speed limiter. Drive 60 or 62 or whatever. Don't drive right up against it. If you're driving, if you're right up against that 14-hour clock all the time, try to schedule yourself a little better. I personally, I don't usually push that 14-hour clock. I have some stuff where I've got a dedicated run that I cover from time to time, from Florida up to Ohio and back. And, you do use your 11 hours, but rarely are you right up against that 14-hour clock. I just went out with one of my drivers. We ran as a team. Granted, a team is a lot different. But again, we were up on our 11. We probably went, 12, maybe 13 hours. We took our time, but we were not, rarely ever right up against our 14. And if we were on our 14, you have to, this kind of goes back to what we were saying with detention and layover, truck order not used. You draw a line, and if it's not going to work, you either pass on that load or you calculate in what it'll take to drive it the next day. If you can't make it, that load needs to pay for an extra day. So I understand where you're coming from, and I completely agree. The 14-hour rule is the most restrictive part of the hours of service right now. But where do you draw the line? Plan your day around a 12-hour day. Only drive 9 to 10 hours a day and only try to work 12. Then you've got 2 hours of leeway. If you were punching a clock in a factory, 14 hours is an awful long day. Most people would never consider that if they were punching a clock somewhere. Hours of service were put into place to protect drivers. Remember that. This was back in the early 1900s. Hours of service has been around for a long time. And it was put in initially by a push from unions to protect drivers from having to work so long. But here we are begging to work more. I would prefer to work less, but get paid more. I think that's where the perception needs to change. We need to focus on working within our own parameters. Let's focus on driving 8 to 10 hours a day and working 10 to 12 hours a day total. And then 14 hours is fine. But when you push to work 14 hours and you push right to that limit all the time, that's when things get tight. So we need to start taking our time and planning for and charging for the time. If it can't be done in your normal 10 to 12 hour period that you've broken down for your daily cost, if it goes into the next day, we need to make sure it charges. We can charge for that. Okay, so it really comes down to what the carriers do. So I agree 14 hours restrictive, but there are ways to plan around it. E-log is a cheater's paradise, the new criminal's world. I agree there's already people that are trying to cheat. There are already people out there that are, I'll tell you a couple of things that they do. They'll be on site and they won't log, they won't go use the yard move or personal conveyance for their moves. They'll just unplug the device, or they will log off, or whatever they'll do, and they'll drive around and it won't log it. The problem is the device will throw up a red flag and say, hey, there's movement here. There's unused miles here for some reason. And it will throw a red flag. Or they will try to change the device in some kind of way, or edit the log in a way that shouldn't work. That will throw up a red flag. Or, I've heard comments about, well, I'll just run 2 devices. I'll have 2 ELDs. I'll unplug one, and when I get to the next destination, I'll plug the other one in. Oh, you go off duty in one town, you drive to the next one, you go on duty in another town. If that's not a big red flag, what is? So there are people that will try to cheat this. There are ways that may not be quite as easy to be caught, but it's a lot easier than being caught on paper. So I don't know that there's any good way. The other thing is most of these devices are cloud-based. So you might be able to cheat the system in your hand or mounted to your truck. You might be able to hack that. But when you go to send, your file, they want you to email or fax the stuff to them. It's got to go through the home office or the cloud-based, OmniTrack software, which is not on your device. It's in their servers. I don't know that you're going to be able to cheat that. We'll see. I'm sure there will be people that will try. I cannot imagine what would happen if you got caught. If a carrier especially got caught, a carrier was cheating this, how will the fines go over? All right. Got some more over here. Let's see. And this was referring to the last caller, Tom. Just like everything else happens, follow the money. And absolutely, follow the money. HCA's got a lot of money. But to be honest, OOIDA has a lot of money too. OOIDA, they didn't even want to talk to them. They got laughed out of the whole thing. All these protesters, the arguments they were making, they were giving the enemy ammunition. It was the worst fight I've ever seen. It was ridiculous. There was no good argument against it. I know a lot of people are still on the thought of constitutional violations and stuff, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, whatever, free speech. There's no way to make that stick either. There really isn't. It would be a real stretch to make any of those stick. So they didn't. Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it. Didn't even want to hear about that. So. But follow the money. Everything is follow the money, especially in the Beltway in Washington. All right, everybody. Let me see. Let me check Blog Talk one last time. Looks like we have one other caller. Elizabeth has not screened this caller yet. Looks like a caller from Florida because I see it's a 407 area code. I am going to bring you on, caller, so be prepared with no screening. And we will wrap the show up with this. 407 area code. Welcome to the show.
Hey. How you doing?
Great. What's your name and where are you calling from? How can we help you?
Okay, my name's Stuart. I'm actually in Orlando. And the question I got for you is talking about time, your time. I'm having an issue with shippers and receivers refusing to sign or put my in and out times on my bill of ladings.
Yep.
And when I go to receive payment from the brokers, they're saying, well, we can't pay this because you don't have in and out time. So how would you handle that? Is there anything wrong with me putting my own times on there if they're refusing? If your broker requires it?
All of my drivers put their own times on there. It is preferable to have your times on the ticket that they get. If they give you, typically when you pick up a load, you'll have at least 3 copies of your bill of lading. You have one for the shipper, one for yourself, and one for the receiver. Of those 3, you would like all of them to have the same information. So obviously the shipper and receiver, or the shipper rather, is only going to have the information when you leave there. The receiver, though, should have all of the information, the load and unload times. The one thing you can do, when you pull into these places, before you hand them the paperwork, make sure you write your time on it. That way they don't have a choice. When you pull in, write your time down. Okay, that's when you're checking in. When you leave, if they don't want to put your time on it, yes, put it on your own slip. I like to try to take a picture of the form with the clock in the background, especially if it's a clock in their office. Take a picture of that. It doesn't have to. It does not have to be on their form. Just take a picture of your bill of lading with their office clock behind it. Okay, that's one thing you can do. That's kind of proof. Not necessarily the most legal way to do it, but it's it'll give yourself a little leverage at least.
I I had, and the reason I asked is I had an issue. I'm dealing with one right now where I've even sent my logs in. I use Keep Trucking, and I printed off that day's logs, and it's got me logged,
Right.
sat there. And now the broker's saying, we can't accept that. I'm like, well, it's good enough for the federal government. Why isn't it good for you guys?
Right.
And now they're telling me, just take your bill of lading and just write your times on there, and then we'll pay you. But I'm like, that just seems sort of sketchy to me to be modifying stuff like that after the fact, So, I mean, since then I've been writing my own times on there if they're refusing to do it. But I just, I didn't want to, legal ramifications and stuff like that. I just want to, cover your own ass, as they say,
It's always best to have all of the information on the copy that the customer has. Typically, the shipper is paying. I mean, sometimes it's a receiver. It's hard to know. But typically, you want to try to get that information on the copy that they have. You could write any time you wanted after you leave. That's where the problem is. You could write on there that you were there for 4 hours. Well, if they don't have it on their copy, then, what are you going to do? So that's why I try to take pictures and so forth. The most important thing you can do is whether or not it's on the bill of lading, I like to do everything in writing with the customer. Now, your customer is the broker, okay? So when you arrive at your shipper or receiver, send the broker an email. I have arrived. And reference your load number and everything. Emails are time-stamped. So when you arrive, send an email. After you've been there 30 minutes or an hour or whatever your policy is, send another email. I've been here an hour. They still haven't even backed me into a door. Hour and a half. I've been here an hour and a half. They've backed me into a door. They still haven't loaded me. Detention starts in 30 minutes at such and such rate. And ideally, you want them to reply. Yes, I understand. You're there. Okay. Detention starts. Okay. Once you have an email trail, now you've got something to stand on because they're all time-stamped, especially if they're responding.
Yep.
Then you want everything you can do to get a bill of lading. So 99% of everything you do should be an email. That way you have everything, all your negotiations, everything in writing. All right? Because you can always print out your email thread. This is the broker I was talking to. They approved it, and everything is, copacetic that way. Having it on the bill of lading is definitely good, especially if the customer has a copy of that because they can't dispute it then. Or having just a picture. A picture isn't necessarily the best either sometimes because, who's to say you didn't, come back in after lunch and take another picture or something, But at least it's something to show you were still there.
Yeah.
And then your logs are, I think logs will eventually be a bigger part of this as more and more carriers start doing what you just did, submitting your logs and say, everything here is time-stamped. The driver arrived on the property at such and such time, didn't leave until such and such time. He was there for 3 hours. He owed me an hour of a detention. And that's proof. But even that is that shows where the truck was. Who's to say you got loaded and you went around back and sat there and had lunch for an hour? So that's why they're not accepting that.
Yeah.
Ideally, you want it on the bill of lading. All this other stuff is a little bit of leverage, but primarily getting it on that bill of lading is your best bet. If they don't do it, again, when you pull in, write the time on the paper before you even hand it to them. Then they don't have a choice. And even take a picture of it to scan it before you even hand it to them. That way they don't have a choice. And because what they could do is they could scribble it out or white it out. But then when you send your bills in, they'll say, there was something written here. What was it? Oh, well, I scanned it before I even gave it to them. They scribbled it out, but here's what it said. It said I got here at 4 p.m. They scribbled it out. You see what I mean? So you want to do everything CYA, cover your just be careful. And that's all you can do. Now, part of the problem is brokers are going to have to educate shippers and receivers. They have to. And shippers and receivers, for the most part, do not understand detention. They don't get it. Doesn't even occur to them. I have a customer. I explained to them, hey, you held my truck for an extra hour or 2 hours, whatever, and they want $50 an hour. And the shipper said, why? I ordered a dedicated truck. The truck is mine until it arrives at my other destination. I ordered a dedicated truck, and we explained to him, and we said, look, if that truck arrived and now is going to be 2 hours late, if they arrived at your destination 2 hours late because the previous customer held them up, wouldn't you be upset? And that's when they said, oh, I understand. So now we're holding them up for the next one. Okay, so they have to understand that they're holding up that truck for other business. shippers and receivers, they think they are the center of the world. They ordered that truck exclusive to them. The brokers need to explain to them why detention is required. Okay, so we have to start putting pressure on brokers. And if you're dealing with direct customers, it's up to you. As a carrier, it's up to you. You have to explain to the customer why detention is necessary and what it covers and why does it cover that. So putting these things in writing helps, but it might just be that it doesn't matter if it's in writing or not. That shipper is just not going to pay the detention because they don't want to, which is why they won't let you put the times on there. They don't pay detention. They're not going to let you put times on because then you have something to go against them on. So in that case, you know.
But if it's on the rate confirmation, though, it's we should be good, right? I mean, I'm making sure now that putting it on the rate confirmation, just so I know there is something to go back on.
Yes,
like you said.
Ideally, you want it on the rate confirmation. Not every broker will send it on the rate confirmation. I like to get it on the rate confirmation even before we take a load. So if you book a load and they say, I want $50 an hour after 2 hours, this only pays $25. Okay, well, negotiate the detention and whatever you settle on, make sure that they put it on the rate confirmation. That way they can't go back later and say, maybe you settled on $45 an hour. No, well, this only pays $25. So I don't know what they told you on the phone before. It goes back to having everything in writing too. And make sure that you get it on the rate confirmation. If it's on the rate confirmation, it doesn't matter if the customer pays or not. Remember, the broker is your customer. The shipper, receiver, whoever is paying the bill is their customer. Okay, so your contract, the rate confirmation is your contract with your customer. And sometimes the brokers need to be reminded of that. They hire you. The shipper or receiver didn't hire you. They hired you. It's up to them to pay you. This is another thing that requires some red pen sometimes in the broker-carrier agreements, because a lot of times it'll say terminology about how they don't have to pay you if the shipper and receiver don't pay you. But last I checked, the broker is not going to give you the shipper and receiver's credit information before you take the load. So if you can't check the broker and the shipper and receiver's credit, you're going to check the broker's credit probably. You can't check the shipper and receiver's credit. Why would you agree not to allow the broker to waive payment if they don't get paid from their customer? That just doesn't seem right. That's going to require some red ink. All right, so these types of things all need to be read through, pre-negotiated. Definitely if you can get detention times on the rate confirmation beforehand. And it also helps after the fact, after you've had the, let's say you've got $100 of detention, have them send an updated rate confirmation with that detention time included. They don't always do that. Sometimes they will not send an updated rate confirmation. They just want you to bill it that way. Then you have to cross your fingers and hope you get paid, because there's no telling if they'll pay it or not.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
so
I definitely appreciate that. You definitely answered my questions there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for calling. And with that, so I've turned I'm not going overtime. I'm not going to do it. It's not going to happen. There's no way. We're stopping at 8 o'clock. That's what I started with. And here we are at 13 minutes to 9. That's the way I always do things. So that being said, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to all of the callers. Thank you to everybody watching on YouTube and Facebook. And if you're listening to the live stream on L&J Radio, we record the shows live on Tuesday evenings. Check in at the Facebook page, Trucking with Authority. That will give you the most updated times when we'll have the live shows. Again, remember to always dream really big. Don't let anything hold you back. Dream big and aim high. Whatever you dream of, you can reach those goals. So make sure you aim really high. Strategize your plan, because everything changes. Make sure that you have a plan B, a strategy, a way to get there. And be ready to roll with the punches and adapt and overcome. Strategize your plan. Earn your success, because you don't deserve anything. I'm sorry to tell you this. I think the people that put some of these rules and laws and mandates in place think they deserve something. And I'll tell you what, Nobody is born deserving anything. We have to earn it. So get out there and earn your success. Earn it. Because only you drive you. Have a good night, everybody.